repeater users. There we go. Yeah, I'm glad you remembered that. People do want to hear the recording.
Mm.
And you can download this later from Jim, but it doesn't last forever. He keeps it as long as he can in his Dropbox.
Well, I'm going to attempt to download it and then move it into my YouTube channel. So if I can do that, that might help things too. And
Yeah,
by
that's
the way,
good.
that's not a fire truck. That's a crane company in Hanover, Germany.
Well, you
That
just
happens
happen to
that
paint it bright red, huh?
yeah. It happens to have our family name on it, and I thought it's fun because it would be the ultimate, portable, tower at a field day site, but it'd be a little expensive to get it here. But,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, take it away, Bruce.
Oh, is that me?
Yeah.
All right. Well, in a second, just a little background about this talk, and let me put some light back on my face. This talk was started even before I moved to extra class. So this talk, the origins of it are like 25 years old. So some parts of it get a little silly. You can ignore that or laugh at it. I don't really care at this point. Um, but I think there's some good content in there too, and it's sort of an open discussion. So if you have comments, questions, errors, or omissions, feel free to jump in at any time, and I will gladly take any comments or questions during the talk. And with that, I will see if I can do the share thing here. I'm going to share my screen and broadcast, start broadcast. Yeah. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'm getting a spinning pinwheel. So I guess I'm going to drop back to. Are you seeing anything now? What are you people seeing?
I'm your screen on your Mac or iPad or whatever.
Looks like a desktop.
Got the wrong
Okay.
desktop.
You
There
got
we
it?
go.
There it
Yep.
is.
No, I got to move that over to the side there. Okay, so believe it or not, when I did this talk, like more than 25 years ago, it was done on transparencies, and I presented it with an overhead projector. So these are slides that I made on my Mac, and then turned them into transparencies, and I actually used my iPad camera to convert these to digital here. So with that, hey, look at that. We got a Part 97 error. Are you a tech general or extra class? Those are what the FCC allows these days. What can we all be power users? And any of you people in your cars, you got any repeaters tuned in? Who knows? But so feel free to jump in anytime if you have comments, questions, errors, or omissions. And a repeater, hey, it's something that repeats. It even says it in the dictionary. And a power user, somebody with better skills and expertise. I don't claim to be the ultimate power user. I'm somewhere in the middle, but maybe this guy is the ultimate power user.
Oh, go on, get out of here.
Who knows? He's got the bumper sticker, the ham radio saves lives. Or how about this? Is that a power user? That's actually fairly clean installation compared to this one. Or how about this one? There used to be a guy that would bring a van to the TRW swap meet that kind of looked like this. And he had a 100-foot tower that he could put on the roof of his van using a boat rigging. It was kind of frightening just to stare up at it. Or how about that one? That's going a little nuts too. I almost wonder if that's Photoshop, but it looks awfully real. Bobby, I think you got your microphone turned on. Or Okay, so a little bit of history about repeaters. To the best of my knowledge, first repeater, one of the first ham repeaters was in Northridge, not far from Los Angeles in Pasadena, 1954. And it was a VHF 2-meter AM repeater. In fact, this gentleman, Art Gentry, W6MEP, was the builder of that. And so this was, one of his rigs here. And later, this is another one there. But this is Mr. Gentry on the left with his buddy Bill. Sadly, I didn't meet in either of these gentlemen, but I thought it would have been fun to interview Art Gentry before he passed away, but I missed my opportunity and, put him on videotape. But, and so here's one of his AM repeaters. I think FM and repeaters kind of came in the 1960s and then certainly into the 70s. And now we have digital. So how many repeaters? Now, by the way, some of the statistics in here may be a little outdated. I haven't checked them in a while, but roughly 50,000 repeaters around the world, not all ham, some of them may be public service, etc. And maybe about 31,000 in the United States. But what's a power user? Power user knows how to use their radios confidently and is prepared for emergencies. They're good communicators. They respect other people in the air, et cetera, et cetera. Appliance user, they think they're operating a microwave, oven. This is one of the humor parts of the talk, but they're yelling CQ into the microwave oven, thinking they're going to get somewhere. Now let's see, where are the hams? These stats are a bit outdated, I think, but at one time Japan had more hams than the United States, and I think that still does. If anybody knows any different than that, go ahead and speak up. You can leave your mic on too if you have things you want to jump in with. California has more hams than any other state, but I think per capita, Alaska has the most number of hams. And a lot of that is because they live in, remote areas and they respect the value of ham radio. There's a lot of bush pilots up there too. A little bit about call signs. You have a prefix, a district, and a suffix. So it's kind of the breakdown. Now, when I hear a new call sign on the air that I haven't heard before, I kind of focus on the suffix because there's, that's a much more variable thing than the prefix is. And so, there's different ways of writing, sticking it in your head, before you're a ham, the call sign storage is very small, but as we get licensed, it gets bigger there. In fact, by the way, I think N6EN's on tonight. You see your call sign there, Ken. So as we get into ham radio, the call sign storage sort of takes over your skull and your normal thinking becomes very limited. So bear that in mind as you get deeper into ham radio. Using your call sign on repeaters. Speaking normal English, you don't need a lot of code and stuff on repeaters. HF, worldwide activities, is more formal. Repeaters is less formal. Speaking plain language. And so if you're calling somebody, you put your call sign second typically. So if I'm calling WA6ABC, this is N6TFS, which is what I was at one time. If you want to jump into a conversation, just jump in with your call sign. Using the word break can get you into trouble sometimes, especially don't say break 3 times because they may think you have an emergency. And you're IDing, you can just use your call sign. You don't have to say N6TFS for ID. Some people like to add that. I'm not sure what other reason you use it for other than ID, but some people like to add that little bit of extra text to it. And when you're done talking, just give your call sign. You don't have to necessarily say clear on, I'm clear on your, final. Some people like to use that. And you don't have to ID for the other ham. Some people as a courtesy like to repeat another ham's call sign, and then that's an optional thing. It's not required. And if you're moving to another frequency, QSYing, You can just say N6TFS QSY. That's it. You've cleared. Before using a frequency, a repeater frequency, and even, HF, etc. It's always good to listen before you transmit. And then you can say, is the frequency in use? If you don't get a response, hey, it's yours to use. Hopefully you won't be interfering with anybody. So let's talk a bit about the repeaters. And I've got a whole variety of things here. There's a lot of repeaters in California. And so, sometimes it's overwhelming. And there's a lot in the LA area. We have a lot of mountains around us. And the repeater that a lot of us use here for the passing radio clubs is the W6MPH repeater. That's on a building in downtown Pasadena. It works very well. Being high is good, but that makes you subject to issues sometimes. So sometimes it's nice to have coverage kind of tapered to the area that you want to use. So learning which repeaters cover different areas, it's all part of the personality of each repeater. The owners and operators, the coverage area, that all repeaters have different personalities. I've got this book that, these are all those dots are radio sites that people, in fact, many cases, clubs have to pay rental fees to have the repeaters up there. And running a repeater is maintenance and costs and stuff. It's something we have to appreciate and be thankful for, that the repeater owners are doing for us to allow us to use them. So let's talk a little bit about what I'm calling the family. You have people that own the repeaters, or maybe the trustee of the repeater. Control operators can be the same people. Sometimes they help maintain these, they're being civil on there. And some people have, if they're a control operator, they may have the ability to shut off the repeater if something goes haywire, hopefully not. But then you have service technicians that are separate people, that sometimes they're part of the same group. If it's a club, sometimes you're using the talents within the club to keep the repeater going. And then at the lowest level is us users. And this is you and me. We're the guests there. And we should use the repeaters as they request. Repeaters are crowded. LA area, there are no open repeater frequencies. If you want to put up a new repeater, you may have to move to the middle of the country someplace. Major cities, every possible repeater frequency generally is in use, with a few exceptions. In the talk here, I didn't mention the 900 megahertz. There are a few ham repeaters of 900 megahertz. I do skip over that here. But 2 meters and UHF 440 are most popular bands for repeater usage. And we do have the 222 megahertz band here. In fact, there's a system called the Condor Connection, which links much of California together. It's about a dozen repeaters the last time I checked. They're not always on the air, but there's one central hub repeater and they all talk into that. And it acts like one giant repeater. Pretty amazing. And that's on the 222 megahertz. So look up the Condor Connection if you have a radio for that band. But a lot of us have dual band for 2 meter and 440, and those are great all-purpose bands. Some of these other bands get a little more esoteric. Years ago, when I had my first HF radio, it was little Uniden President radio. And I was a general at the time, I believe. And I tuned to a 10 meter repeater frequency, and I worked a repeater in England, and that was from my car. So that was kind of special. So all of these have different possibilities, but the 2 meters and 440 are definitely most popular in most areas. So, hams, we do a lot of driving. Having your radio in a car is really valuable. Handhelds are great. I've got plenty of them myself, but I've got a dual band Kenwood in my car, and that makes it easier. You have more output and you have better audio, and it's not sliding around the seat, or In the old days, the back of the radio was a heat sink. I'd heard of people, they were rag chewing, talking so long that it would melt the vinyl on the seat, since the back of the radio is the heat sink. I don't hear of that much happening anymore, and by the way, repeaters are not as busy as they used to be. Sometimes I see comments online that how come I've just got my license and I'm turned to a local repeater and there's nothing going on. Well, when I got licensed over 30 years ago, repeaters, there was a lot more activity. They're quieter now. That's a plus and a minus. It gives you more chance to use it with your friends. But so how do you look them up? There's books. You can get ARRL books, and there's other good ones available for local stuff. And there's websites like the repeaterbook.com website. That's very useful. And here's some of the output from the Pasadena area. 10-meter repeater up on Mount Harvard north of us, and 900. I don't know. So that's up on Mirador, which is above the Rose Bowl. Caltech has a repeater up there too. So and there's another list of them. Everybody hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good. You're such a quiet audience. I appreciate it. In fact, this is a map that I authored, designed more than 30 years ago, and I updated it for the Pasadena Radio Club. Originally, it was Junn's Electronics. Anybody remember Junn's Electronics in West LA? PJ Junn. And and this is, by the way, this is on the Pasadena Radio Club website. You can download it there for free. And sometimes at the physical meetings, we have them there to hand out. And I appreciate, it getting printed up. So let's actually take a look at some of the repeater sites themselves. Mount Wilson is a great broadcasting site. Is it a great ham radio site? Well, you got to have really good filtering to be up there, because you might get overloaded by the really high wattage broadcasters. But there are ham repeaters up there. Now, not far from there, west along the ridge, is Mount Disappointment. It's even a little higher. And I believe that used to be a Nike missile base or something back in the 50s and 60s. And there's government repeaters, and there's some ham radio repeaters up there too. And in fact, let me back up there. Many times there's a little building next to the towers at these repeater sites. That's where the electronics are. And then they have the antennas, of course, up on the tower. Mount Lukens is a great ham radio site. I'm sure there's a lot of, other land mobile repeaters and maybe other pagers and things up there. That's above La Crescenta. And it's kind of what it looks like. I've never hiked up to that one, but it certainly covers LA very well. Oat Mountain is out in the San Fernando Valley, and that covers the San Fernando Valley and probably much of LA really well. Flint Peak, hey, guess what? This is close to us. This is above the Rose Bowl and just to the west of the Rose Bowl. In fact, David, are you here, N6AN? He likes to go up there and do some of his summits on the air activity from there. And Flint Peak, when I joined the club in 1989, we were using the K6QQN repeater that was on 147.705. And Bill Cronkite, that was his call sign. And that was our primary repeater until we switched several years later over to W6MPH. And so that's another look at Flint Peak. Some of these, that's an FM broadcaster there, that one with a little knurled knuckle antenna elements on it. That's like a phased array. So some of these antennas can look pretty strange. And you can see the hardline coax coming out of the back of the building running up to the tower. So that's it's pretty heavy duty stuff that they're dealing with. Not very flexible, like, even RG8. I think that's tough. Nothing compared to that. Our repeater's on top of this building in downtown Pasadena, W6MPH. And really great setup. Bill, are you online tonight? You want to tell us about this? Maybe you didn't make it in.
Yeah, he's not here.
Yeah, okay. Well, so this is, I haven't been up there in years. This may be a pretty good photo of what it still looks like. And so a repeater is a rack of equipment, and depending upon which band it in, you have these filters, these cans, as some people call them, duplexer makes up. And that allows you to use one coax for both transmit and receive out to your antenna. And you want to have as much isolation electrically as possible. And here's the antenna there. So that's on top of that building. So these have to be tuned very carefully so that the receiver does not hear the transmitter. And on 2 meters, I'm sure most of you know, and maybe some of you are studying for your tech, how much difference apart are they? 600 megahertz apart. So, or 600 kilohertz. So, yeah, 600K. So it's a pretty precise thing they have to do. On when you're on UHF 440, you have a much greater spread between the input and output, and the cavities are smaller too. So it makes up. You've got backup batteries, and the receiver is down there, power amplifier, and the brain there is the controller, and that keeps tabs on what's going on, and the IDer is in the controller typically. So when you hear the Morse code IDer or the voice IDer, that's coming out of the controller. And there's a little speaker there that lets you hear what's going on. And this polyphaser thing helps with lightning protection, etc. So did I get any of that wrong? Any of you? I think it. So there's another great repeater site down south of us in Orange County, Santiago Peak, which is sort of halfway between Pasadena and San Diego. And so when you look up books, if you want to talk to San Diego, you can try to dial up repeaters. I don't know when I got licensed, 145.22 was a open repeater. And some guy helped abuse the system. And because of that, they decided to make it a private or closed repeater because of this one guy that was causing them trouble. Maybe more than one guy. There was a couple of people that were interfering with that system. And and then out by Big Bear, in front of Big Bear area, is Sunset Ridge, and that looks over the LA area really well.
Yes.
And then you go out towards Arrowhead, etc. You have Keller Peak, which is pretty high elevation. And then one of the highest ones in the area, Onyx Peak, is out towards Big Bear. And Onyx Peak doesn't have any commercial power, so it's all relying upon solar panels and batteries. And I don't know if they use generators out there on occasion. I was out there once when the guy was repairing the W6FMO repeater, which I used to be active on, and you can see the concertina wire around the fence there. People were stealing solar panels and stuff, and since there's no guards out there, they were trying to protect the site by adding, like barbed wire. And the W6FNO repeater is tied in the one on Johnstone Peak. It's a dual site repeater system. I'll talk about it in a moment. And it lets you talk long distances. And it's open, and it has a 30-second timer, which is very unusual, and no PL tone. And then out off the coast is Catalina Island, and there's a great repeater group out there. And they have a Monday night net. I think it starts at 7. And at the airport, they have the antennas for all these repeaters on the roof of their one of the airport buildings, Airport in the Sky. And for their nets, they link the repeaters together sometimes too. So it's a pretty good group, and it's probably one of the busier repeaters in Southern California. And you can talk along the coast very well. In fact, this repeater is so unusual. people from the high desert can hit it. And I don't know whether it's knife edge, propagation getting over the hills or what, but a Catalina repeater is unusual. It's a 147 decimal 090 repeater. And let's see, I want to talk about nets. Not too much to say about that, but there's a lot of nets around. And that's a great way of getting involved in local groups. Technical stuff, these bands, here's the 2-meter band. Inputs and outputs are spread around and they're sort of alternating. At the very end, you have CW, and you definitely don't want to stray down there. So, I mean, one of the things about being a ham is understanding band plans so we don't interfere with other people. And if you properly programmed your radio for repeaters, you're not going to interfere. But when you go on simplex and you start straying into these areas, you might get yourself into trouble. So here's the basic components of a repeater. When you transmit, when you key down your radio, you have the input, and then the repeater is simultaneously retransmitting you in real time. And because there's two frequencies, an input frequency and an output, it allows it to do it. The duplexer separates these two, and the radio, these radios, sometimes are old land mobile radios, have been modified to act as repeaters. You have the controller that tells the repeater radio what to do, and a power supply. So, it's not that super high tech, but everything has to be tuned just right for it to work properly. And of course, when we first get licensed, programming the HT is always a pain. Okay, did I get the input frequency set right? Some radios will do that automatically, the plus or minus, especially in the 2-meter band, but then getting the PL tone set and then moving the VFO contents into a memory channel. It's not easy for any of us because the radios all program a little differently. Here's more of another repeater. I don't have to hang on this long, but in fact, this is a UHF repeater. You can see how the duplexer is much smaller. In fact, there's only 4 cans there on that one. So, but what do they have below? They have 2 meters below. So this is a dual. They've got 2 repeaters going on here, and sometimes they can link them. Some groups allow fancy stuff. Here's another view of. These are images I just pulled off of, doing Google searches. But it takes a lot of work to keep all this stuff going and keeping the antennas going. When there's frost up on the hills and snow and ice, antennas break and somebody has to go up there to fix them. In fact, some of these sites, they use helicopters sometimes to go up there. Feed line for repeaters is very different than typically what we use for casual ham radio stuff. This is hard line and very stiff. It's corrugated a little bit to try to get a little flexibility in there, but it's low loss. And when you go to the higher frequencies like UHF and above, you don't want to have a lot of loss because the receiver is really important. If the receiver doesn't have good sensitivity, it doesn't matter how much power it's transmitting. Yeah, there you can see that it's bigger around than their thumb. And here's another view of some, duplexer cavities. And another type. Here's in the upper left corner. That's a mobile one. Some people make portable ones. There's even people that put repeaters sometimes in the trunk of cars. In fact, the Highway Patrol, typically for years, I think their primary frequency is around 6 meters or so. You see that they have the long whips, but they have extender radios. So one radio is talking to the other one in the car so they can walk away from the car and not have to carry a 6-meter radio around. So they're probably carrying a UHF radio that talks to the other radio in the car. Here's a view of a controller for a repeater, and there's many types of those. And some people are now replacing them with these small computers. You can build up small computers to do the same thing. I had a repeater that used the same radio. I sold it to a friend of my brother's up at JPL, and it was a Master Executive 2 GE. These are great radios. Originally, this could have been in a police car or something. Anyway, there's these companies that modify them, and then they put a controller inside there, actually. And they do some simple mods inside, and they turn the land mobile radio into a repeater. They're not that much money, but they're big and heavy, and then you still need the duplexers. So none of this stuff is is as easy as carrying around a handheld radio. And I had that as a portable, and the portable I had weighed like 75 pounds when you got the whole thing together. And so much for that. There's a great repeaterbuilder.com is a website if you want to explore, and it's a hangout for people that assemble repeaters. I haven't been there in a while. I'm not that serious about building a repeater anymore. I did that one, and I've moved on. But so here's some goofy little diagrams. I'm not sure how well they play here, but if you had a side view of propagation coming off an antenna, you can see if you have little hills, if you're in that little shadowed area, you're not going to have any coverage. And if you're too close, like being too close to Mount Wilson, you're going to be in a little gap also. So line of sight is important, whether it's a repeater or whether you're working Europe on HF. Sometimes you want to have good propagation. And if you're in a moving car, by the way, this is a top-down view. Repeater coverage can be very ragged on the edges. If you're in a moving car and you can't work a repeater, find a hot spot and park there and make your contact and go on. Because while you're moving, if you're not in a strong coverage area, you're going to have a weak signal. So understanding hot spots. And so if you're receiving the repeater well on your radio, if it looks like it's strong to receive, it's probably a good spot to transmit from too, typically. If you got a fluttered low strength signal on your receiver, it's not going to work well, probably. So why are repeaters useful? Well, simplex, we understand from one radio to another. But if there's a mountain in the way, the mountain's the problem. Well, instead of the mountain being the problem, let's make the mountain the solution. So you put a repeater at the top of the mountain. And now the mountain, it's when I transmit from down below, it's as if I'm standing on the mountain. So that's the beauty of these things, is they extend the range of our radios. And we're virtually on the mountain. I think that's a good word. Even though I'm below, the repeater allows me to pretend like I'm at the top of the mountain, because that's where the repeater is. We don't want to be in the shadowed area. So line of sight, Earth has curvature, but some weird things can happen sometimes. There are certain conditions that allow even VHF and UHF signals to go longer distances. There are companies that actually do for land mobile, not so much for ham radio, but they will go out and fix a pattern. They can see where the good areas are and where it's bad, So they will actually make diagrams, and they'll show them to the people they're contracting with, that this is your coverage area. And this is probably done for broadcasters too. If you're running a television station from the top of a mountain, you'd like to know where it's hitting from, what areas it has good coverage into. And repeaters have the same sort of issues to deal with. And if you're behind a mountain, it's not going to work so good. So there's very few repeaters that are carrier squelched anymore. That means no PL required. It goes in and out. That's pretty rare. Almost all of them need a subaudible tone now. So if somebody's trying to transmit and they don't have the tone turned down, there's going to be no output. PL is a trademark from Motorola Corporation. It means private line. So this is something we have to deal with in the big cities. If you're out in the country and there's no other repeaters on the same frequency, you don't necessarily have to run a PL tone on a repeater. I mean, it's good practice to do it, because then maybe you'll prevent some noise from coming through, etc. I mean, sometimes repeaters repeat pager noise, etc. So weird stuff happens. So if it's working correctly, you're transmitting on the input frequency with the tone, and then you're getting the signal out. Some repeaters, like W6MPH, it actually transmit PL on the output of the repeater also. And why is that useful? Because this repeater, W6MPH here in Pasadena, is co-channeled with two other repeaters. They're in Southern California. One's out towards Oxnard, and the other one's down in San Diego. And there's times where we can hear the other two. And by using the PL on your radio, you can have it, squelch out the other repeaters. So you're only going to hear the Pasadena repeater then. So that's a useful thing sometimes. Three basic kinds of repeaters: open, closed, private. Hopefully I've got this correct. Open repeater, anybody licensed can use that repeater. And even though it's got a PL tone, that doesn't mean it's private or closed. It's because of the technology. They're trying to get the cleanest usage out of it without noise. They put the PL tone on it. In fact, I don't know where this was. I found this online. Some group even advertised their repeater on a sign out in the street. Obviously, at that time, they didn't have a PL necessary. In fact, they didn't even show the offset symbol, whether it's plus or minus. But unless they're going simplex. So here's a look at repeater site. In fact, you can see back here, here's a helicopter somebody used to get up there. I don't know where this was. But, it's a lot of work to assemble these things, especially if it needs supplemental power, backup batteries. I mean, it's an endless list of things. I mean, the Pasadena Club is lucky to have a relationship with Bill Westfall and W6MPH repeater. We've helped him at times, and they sure help us a lot. He helps us a lot. There's some clubs that, and I've been to meetings where they have endless arguments about what to do to the repeater. Believe me, after a while, that gets boring. Closed repeaters, you may need membership, so you can inquire. Sometimes they still advertise the offset and the PL tone, and you may ask, how do I join? And they'll tell you how to join the club and use the repeater. And so here's an example of some repeaters. And here's an example of a club maybe sitting down and try to figure out, do we need to buy a new set of duplexers? It's going to cost $3,000. Who knows? It's expensive stuff. In fact, duplexers typically in the past are made out of solid copper. So, and the cost of copper these days is high. So here's another group, another system, and they've got a generator there for backup. And whoa, can you imagine that one? Oh, might have some damage on those antenna elements. Private repeaters tend to be kind of a membership group, and sometimes maybe you have to be invited in. Closed and private oftentimes require, membership fees. So you have to inquire. Each group is a little different. There's a great system. I'm not a member, by the way, called the Cactus Intertie, and they link across the Southwest here. And I think primarily on UHF. And if you Google that, you can read about it online. It looks like they go all the way up to Salt Lake City and above Sacramento and into Texas. That is a private system. There's their website. It lists some of the repeaters. In fact, in this system, I think they want members that are interested in really being active, and in some cases even helping with maintenance, and people that are not just going to be a stump over in the corner. Let's talk about radios for a minute. There's multi-band radios and mono bands, dual band, tri-band. Wow, got a lot of choices these days, and the prices start pretty low. fact, one of my neighbors who moved in here recently into the apartments had one of these Baofangs, and I was intrigued. It only cost $20. It worked, but I noticed right away that the audio output was low. And then the other day I was on the repeater with KC70, and he was telling me how muffled it sounded. I sent it back. I may buy another one just to see how their consistency is. Who knows? Which is better, HT or mobile? All of us need HTs. They're great, handy to take places, and as a backup. But if you're in your car a lot, the mobile radio makes a lot of difference. More output power, better receivers. And if you want to set up a base station at home, a mobile radio has much better receiver and certainly more power. So, it's a better package. And the price of radios is relatively low these days. When I got licensed in 1988, my first radio was a Kenwood TH25AT, 2 meters only, 14 memories, $300. So think about that for a second. That Baofeng that I was toying with cost $20, and it did more than that $300 radio, but not made quite to the same standards. One tip, if you're using battery packs, and it's good to have battery packs for your handhelds, but don't leave them in there too long. You deal with this kind of corrosion, can damage the interior radios. Repeater modes, and let me get a little sip of water here. Normally you go input and output in real time, and there's standard offsets. But there is a thing called a simplex repeater, not widely used, but they get used occasionally on public service type events. It means store and forward. N1BN calling. Then it pauses. N1BN calling. It just repeats it. It's got a little digital memory. And they're handy, but it requires practice from the users because it is store and forward. But you don't need a duplexer. And that's one cute thing. And it's only on one frequency. So I've got one. I used to have one made by Radio Shack. It worked back when Radio Shack actually made radio stuff. And I've got a better one, and I haven't wired it up yet. I should do that. Odd split repeaters. There's a few of those around LA. In fact, one of the notorious pigpen type repeaters is an odd split if it's still in the air. That's where it doesn't deal with the standard 600 kilohertz offset or the 5 megahertz on like UHF. And it's harder to program. That's another thing you have to learn in your radio is you have to input the TX and RX separately. Now, if you're programming off a computer using software, that's pretty easy to do. A lot of people are doing that. This is like the radio I have in my car. It's a very good mobile radio. Kenwood has been making them for years, so it's probably a very, very mature design. Maybe they're getting ready to replace it. Who knows? Offset modes. Normal offset, plus or minus. Reverse. Some radios have a reverse thing on their radio, on the front panel. Or you can program a channel to do reverse. Why is that useful? Let's say a repeater is not running and I want to talk to somebody nearby that's on the same frequency pair. All I do is I hit the reverse button and I'm talking to them simplex on the input and output. We're talking to each other simplex, but using two frequencies. Sort of an odd thing to think about, but it does work and it's come in handy. In fact, back when I was helping with, we would take highway motorist calls from the freeways. Occasionally I would find a person not hitting a repeater well, and I'd hit the reverse button and I'd hear them strong. I could take the radio traffic and then pass it on to the highway patrol, and didn't really need the repeater. Simplex in the output is useful sometimes. If you're gathering a group of people and you're out of the range of the repeater, you can talk to each other simplex in the output. The one thing to never do is simplex in the input, because you may be bringing up a repeater and you don't know it. And that's going to cause all kinds of havoc. And so, in fact, I'll tell you a short story about that in a moment. But in fact, this is a repeater. W6FNL repeater. Its primary site is on Johnstone Peak, like right above San Dimas, and it's linked to Onyx Peak at 9,000 feet. And they have a UHF link, which is not for users. It's just a backbone link between the two sites. And they did have a voting receiver on Palos Verdes, which is another odd thing. So it could receive in 3 different places. Yeah, so here's this repeater. I don't know that that's exactly where that particular antenna was, but it's that site. Yeah, so this is at least 25 years ago, we were hearing voices on that W6FNL repeater, and like, what the hell is that? Very short little transmissions, and we couldn't. And there, a group of us, would help motorists with highway patrol type calls on that repeater. And one day I'm driving up the 110 and I'm near Chinatown, and I hear that, and I hit the reverse button, and lo and behold, I heard some voice say something like track 9. I go, oh my God. So I drove over to the train station and I went inside, and I talked to somebody at the counter. I said, did somebody just say somebody's name at track 9? Oh yeah, that's George. Where is he? Well, he's up there at the, I said, what radio is he using? Well, these here, we just got them. They were just issued. I said, well, it's programmed on the input of a repeater that can be heard as far as Yuma, Arizona. So somebody in the radio shop for Amtrak had programmed a whole set of radios using a ham radio input frequency. They didn't know they were bringing up a wide distance repeater system. And after I told them that, they got it fixed. They could, occasionally we'd hear people in Yuma, Arizona in that repeater, so through those sites. Let's see. So what if you're blocked from a repeater and you want to talk to somebody? You can try simplex, on the output, or hit reverse. Miscellaneous stuff. DX on 2 meters. A couple of personal stories here. Normally our signals only go maybe a couple 100 miles. We can talk to San Diego if you're in the right spot, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes there's this temperature inversion thing, tropospheric ducting. And a number of years ago, one night I'm listening to Gordon West, his net. I don't know if he's still running, probably is. Famous ham radio instructor. And he said, there's signals coming in on 2 meters from Hawaii. I go, oh my gosh. So I dialed up the Mauna Loa frequency on my base station radio, and I ended up talking to a guy in Honolulu. And I even took my power, as I recall, like down to 10 watts, and we were still able to talk from LA to Mauna Loa repeater, like 2,000 miles on 2 meters. And that's a repeater site on the Big Island. In fact, there's my QSL card, N5 SEZ. He was in the military there, I think. Hickam Air Force Base. So that was kind of fun to do that. That's the only time I've really worked tropospheric ducting and working another repeater. So, and then you can have code channel overlapping repeaters, like I was telling you about Pasadena and Santa Barbara. And you have to be aware, there is overlapping coverage where you can hear both of them. So why is this a problem? Well, I mean, it's not always a big problem, but my late brother, Scott, and some of you knew him, K6SN, longtime JPL employee, and really the person that got me interested in ham radio. He and I were, and this is before I had my license, the early 80s. We hiked up Mount Whitney, and we were on the summit of Whitney, like 1982. And he had his ICOM IC2AT, and he dialed in, and I may have the frequencies wrong a little bit, but he was trying to talk. And if there's a summit of Mount Whitney, by the way, if you haven't been up there, there's a little building there that one of the universities put in for astronomy study. He was trying to talk to Nick Resume. Some of you may know K9 PhD. And funny part is, you look at the list here, how many co-channel repeaters? 147.27. Oh, there's several, 300s, Upland or Hesperia. As Scott would key the radio from the top of Whitney, it would bring up like 6 repeaters. And before he could talk to Nick each time, he'd have to let all the carriers drop independently before they could converse. And I think finally they QSY'd over to the 145-300 repeater, which is on Mount Disappointment, and they were able to talk. So from Whitney to Mount Disappointment, there's a little curvature of the earth there, but it did work. And that's what the radio looks like. That's back. Some of those early programmable, well, that wasn't even programmable. It had like, you turn little wheels that change the frequency. And sometimes they didn't even have a PL encoder in them back then. You'd have to buy. Go ahead.
Yeah. Every once in a while during our Tuesday night nets, I'll hear San Diego coming through loud and clear, even though they're supposedly on a different PL than we are. I pick them up.
There is a guy down there, Bruce, too, that checks in on the W6MPH nets.
Yeah.
Another Bruce. And so, we do hear it, but he can conversely work our repeater up here too. Yeah. I'm not sure what kind of station he has, but it's got to be pretty decent. And he's not doing it with a handheld, I'll tell you that. Yeah. Now, from the top of Whitney, you could maybe do it with a handheld. You're going to say more?
Well, I heard more than just one person. I heard a QSO going on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely. On field day, like from Art Center parking lot where we've done field day, 13 times now. It's not difficult at all to hit San Diego on simplex. When we put up a decent antenna. So I was talking about the W6FNO repeater at Johnstone Peak. Onyx Peak, there's a link. And then they had a so-called voting receiver on Upper Johnstone, but they also had a voting receiver in Palos Verdes. Kind of a complicated setup. And the controller is sensing all these different signals from which receiver, and it votes to decide which one to go with to rebroadcast, to retransmit. So that's kind of a trick deal. So link repeaters, this is like the Condor connection. Fraser Mountain is the hub, and all the other repeaters talk into that one. You have Santiago and Thousand Oaks. And in fact, shortly after I was licensed, we had that earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area. And was that the Loma Prieta earthquake? I think it was. And there's a hill above Silicon Valley there. And I think there's a telescope up there too. That has one of the Condor repeaters on it. There was so much health and welfare traffic being passed at that time that the backup battery failed, and the owner of that particular repeater for Condor, he drove up there with a generator and kept the thing going. It was nice for a few more days. I guess they had lost their commercial power. So here's Condor integrated repeaters. In fact, they take a high band VHF. I had a GE Master 2, and I donated it to them because that's the one that that Mark Gilmore guy can modify to turn into a 220 repeater. Yeah, here's a map of Condor. In fact, let me see if let me see if we've got Condor in the air here. Maybe I can bring it up. Is the frequency in use, N1BN? Good evening. I'm down in Pasadena on a radio club discussion about repeaters. Is there anybody up north that can jump in for a moment and Tell us where you are, N1BN. Quiet night. All right, anybody anywhere on the Condor connection can jump in and tell us where you are. All right, thank you. Quiet night on Condor, N1BN clear. Oh, well. So I'm hitting the repeater on Santiago Peak in Orange County. It's like full scale up here. Papa system, I'm not active in it, but I think people in our club are. It's a great system that has a lot of possibilities. This is kind of a meaningless thing, but I've heard it happen occasionally. Ham A wants the signal report, and he asks for it over the repeater. Ham B has got a weak signal, and he's telling the other Ham A that your signal's broken. Ham C jumps in and says, no, you're fine. So that does happen on occasion. So don't always trust your signal report until you have maybe a second person jump in. Yeah, N1BN looking for a signal report. Now, I don't hear this much anymore, but when I got licensed, sometimes people would go on like Condor. In fact, they would get tired of it. Could somebody give us a demonstration? So you'd get like a whole number of people jumping in, and it would go on for a few minutes, and they would get tired of that happening. And let's say you're someplace and something happens, you can make a QST. N1BN, I've just noticed that there's a big brush fire and so, just to make people aware of it on the frequency, So don't be afraid to do that kind of thing. Just don't step on other people when you do it. Make sure the frequency is clear before you do that. This isn't such a super useful thing, but occasionally you get people abusing a repeater. You can monitor a repeater through a scanner or a separate radio and pretend to talk to the other ham, and you're actually talking over the telephone. There's tricks you can play on people. And I don't want to get deep into the whole thing about jammers, but hopefully we don't have much problem with them these days. Most repeaters have a timer. F&O repeater is 30 seconds, which is unusual. And they don't have a courtesy beep either. And the owners there are, that's just the way they are. But I like a repeater that has, a little, beeps that let you know what happens. When you hear the beep, you can start talking. You don't have to wait for the carrier to drop. And sometimes people new to a repeater think they have to let the carrier totally drop before they can start talking. You don't. If you hear, when they let off on their push the talk button and you hear the beep, then it's your turn to start talking. In fact, this is what a timer looks like in one particular setup. It's a little microcircuit, and it's built into most controllers now. Now, if you have friends, you can program your radios the same. So essentially you're channelized. And if you don't want to give out the frequency over the air, you can tell your friend move over to channel 5 or give it a name like gold or something, like the police might do. Move over to channel red. And once in a while, the odd thing happens. These antennas for repeaters are typically vertically polarized, but sometimes when the signal arrives at your radio, it may not still be vertical. So once in a while, if I'm listening to people, if I turn my radio different angles, like I was listening to the Catalina repeater the other day with that $20 radio, I could hear it better when it was horizontal. And for whatever reason, the RF, when it's arriving at my antenna, has changed polarization a little bit. So toy around, you do what works. Stand on one foot if that helps. Audio level, talking too loud in the radio will cause things to get distorted. Normal deviation should be a nice pure, like ideally like a sine wave. And when there isn't enough deviation, kind of like that $20 radio I bought, it's a little harder to hear. And if you're doing an activity, especially like public service stuff, I remember years ago we did like a walkathon here in Pasadena. Club supported. We had somebody stationed like down in Raymond Street, and we kept calling and calling them. We had some traffic for them to take care of. Something. Did they need bottles of water there or cups or something? We finally sent a person down there in a car, I think, to check. Well, the person had bumped the radio off channel and didn't even know it. So. I'm not blaming them, but stuff happens. Your battery can go bad. You can pump your radio off thing. Like worst thing is when you're transmitting, you don't know it, and everybody can hear what's going on, and that does happen on occasion. A stuck mic, and it can be a little funny at times. Jammers, what not to do? Don't feed on their reactions. They're just trying to rattle your cage. Typically, don't answer them, if they're making outrageous statements or something, or pretending to be something that they aren't. There was a notorious guy here in Pasadena a number of years ago. He had made up this call sign, and it was like, what was it? SZX, ZX. It was a Swedish prefix, and he claimed that the FCC was allowing him to do it. It turned out he was one of those, people, a sovereign citizen person. In fact, I saw him one day, and he didn't have a license plate on his car, and so he didn't really believe in things. And probably the most notorious ham that is no longer a ham anymore was this turkey, Jack Gerritsen, and he was interfering with repeaters for quite a long time, and he ended up spending time in jail. He gave me his phone. He gave out his phone number over the air once, and I called him at home, and he says, "Wow, I didn't expect anybody to call." And I said, "Well, why are you doing what you're doing? The FCC is reviewing your case." He says, "Well, this might be my only chance to be a ham." Well, he later got arrested for interfering with public service frequencies, Coast Guard, and all sorts of things. I mean, who knows where he is now, but not on the air that I've heard. And so there are bad boy repeaters. I haven't kept up with them. I haven't listened to them in a long time. And in a big city, maybe they serve a purpose, because there was times in the past where suddenly you're hearing jamming over on the Catalina repeater. Well, you knew one of the bad boy repeaters was off the air. Their sandbox had been emptied. Yeah, even the LA Times did a thing about it once, which was not that great of an idea. Made them out to be a hero or something. Here's one of the frequencies. The Renegade Radio. Auto patch, there isn't so much of that anymore. And there may be some groups that still do it. This is a way of making phone calls through your ham radio. I would think out in the middle of the country, there may still be some auto patch, and maybe even free auto patch. Hasn't existed around here, and I don't know of any groups that are still doing it, but there may be some. A cell phone is easier, but I think since the advent of cell phones, auto patch is kind of going away. And my little rant on highway emergencies is, we all have these radios. If you're out someplace and you don't have cell phone coverage, but you can hit a repeater, find somebody that's near a telephone and they can call it in for you. All you have to do in plain English is say, is there anybody near a telephone that can make a 911 call or auto club call for me, etc. We all have that ability to do it if you're near a telephone. And if you're out in the desert, there may be places where there is not cell phone coverage. So, you want to write down the information, read it back for accuracy, make the call, pass the traffic, and then get back to the originating person. Let them know that it's been, that the information has been passed along. Collect the facts, tune to a repeater, ask for help, wait on channel for confirmation. And if you want to get into disaster type communications, there's Aries and Races groups around here. Reach out and touch someone. So, And public service things, hey, there's lots of groups that need help. In fact, Angeles Crest 100 always needs hams every year. And I'm not sure, typically, I think it's in August of late. So even if you're a new ham, there's ways to help.
Yeah, it's early July now.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, LA Marathon, I think they're still using hams. A lot of us, I helped with the Rose Parade for 15 years. Even got to take a picture next to John Glenn when he was Grand Marshal, and I never got a copy of the darn photo, unfortunately. So you get to go places with your two-way radio that it's kind of fun sometimes. And for 7 years, I escorted the Downey float from Downey up to the float formation area. Let's see if this comes across. Come on. Is it going to load? Come on. Oh, no audio tonight. Oh, well. That's a little bit of traffic from an event that some members of our club worked. And there's even a tiny portable repeater. These are not so great. In fact, I think this one, it's on UHF only. And it's not that much money. It's only like $400. And there's a tiny duplexer in there. But the split is unusual. I think so. But some people like to build their own, from parts. Hey, there's repeaters up in space even. We've got orbiting satellites. None of them are geostationary yet that I'm aware of. Is there one from the Middle East that is geostationary? Tom, you're on board here. You could tell us about that.
Yeah, Q100. It was put up by Sheikh and built by AMSAT DL in Germany.
Wow.
It works great.
Have you used? Go ahead.
We would hope that we would get one of those pretty soon.
Oh, so it doesn't have a footprint over us. It's just hitting the Middle East.
It's over Europe and part of the Atlantic. You could get it if you're down in Florida. It touches Florida just a little bit, but
oh wow,
it's basically it's geostationary, and if you get like a direct TV antenna, it's kind of like there's all sorts of stuff. It's a transponder. It has CW and fast scan TV and all sorts of stuff. Really, it's all got a big band plan.
And does it have some voice modes also?
Oh yeah.
So FM or?
Yeah.
And what kind of split does it have on it? Is it in one band, or do you have to use a?
It's kind of like, you got to think like, I haven't never worked it, but it's kind of like FT8 where it's got a band plan, and I've never used the application, but you could adjust it.
Wow. Well, so is AMSAT making plans to do something like that for the U.S.? Is that the?
Yeah, they've been working on a variety of. They just can't seem to get it together because it's very expensive. This was obviously funded by uber rich people in Qatar, so they're trying, but they've got several different programs right now where they're working on building this program called AMSAT Golf, GOLF, higher orbit, and so it'll be more like what AO40 was supposed to be. It would be like an elliptical orbit, so it'd go out there for a while and it look like it's geostationary, and then it'd come back and circle back. So we're hoping that that'll happen, in the future. There's a lot of work going on there, and I think that ARDC had something to do with it with the grant, so they're getting some support.
Okay, well, keep us in touch with that as it progresses.
Yeah, pretty neat.
Right. Yeah, great. Thanks. And there's the digital repeaters. I don't own any digital radios yet, but there's plenty of activity coming along. And with that, and there's good groups doing a lot of systems, doing digital. And then there's Echolink, etc. There's that other one, Star, what is that?
All-Star.
All-Star. So it lets you talk through repeaters, and essentially you're doing DX through repeaters, theoretically. So that's all neat, whistles and bells. And these are the hardest materials known to man: diamond, silicone, graphene, and radio manuals. How about that? And the speed of light can travel around the Earth 7.5 times in 1 second, by the way, at the equator. Just for a little throwing in there. So thanks for listening into this Gabathon. Anybody have any comments, questions, errors, or omissions? Look at that site. Oof.
I had a couple things.
Yeah.
Let's see, one comment. It's kind of a minor thing, but if you're dealing with a distant repeater and you're near another one that's on that, for instance, if you were from that San Diego area, one that's on our code channel we hear sometimes. If one of your users came up here and he's trying to get into that, well, he cranks his power way up and he gets into it maybe.
Right.
And since we're using decode, we don't hear him. But we can't get into our repeater when he's
Right.
transmitting. Drives us crazy. So do not use unnecessarily high-powered a distant repeater just to prove you can do it. You might have to, but avoid that. And one other item, the Angeles Crest 100-mile endurance run this year is August 2nd. August 2nd.
All right.
And we're still trying to make that happen. The fires took out a lot of our course. It could end up being an out and back course from Wrightwood to Wrightwood. I hope not.
Well, keep us up to date with that, and we'll try to crank out another year. Yeah, you reminded me of something that happened one night, John. I don't remember what repeater I was listening to, but this guy jumps in, newly licensed, and he thought he was working like a repeater, for example, in Eureka, California. I said, no, I'm in Los Angeles. No, I'm in the repeater book. This frequency is Eureka. I could not convince him out of it. But he was enjoying his evening.
The translation of the word Eureka is I have found it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Comment,
Right.
Bruce.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're talking about people going off frequency during an event. You lock your radio. If you
Right.
don't lock your radio, you're bound to go off frequency. Just put it, and all the radios have locks. You just lock them and keep on the same frequency.
Or do this, program every memory channel in the radio with that frequency. So, yeah, working public events like that, it really is a test for what can go wrong. I mean, over the years, I think we've all seen, so many things happen that that it does help to sharpen your edge a little bit. Anybody else have any comments? All right. Well, thank you all for listening in this evening and watching, and hopefully made some sense out of this. I'm
Thank
sure
you,
there's.
Bruce.
I'm sorry.
Just said thank you, Bruce.
Yeah. I'm sure there's other aspects to repeaters I missed, but this was the talk that I put together. I think I gave it at HamCon one year. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I'm going to return you to your normal viewing, if I remember how to exit this thing gracefully. What's that up there?
Okay, I'm going to terminate the recording now. If there's no
Okay.
further questions.
Right.